Welcome, everyone, to the Soul Enchilada. This is Christine Ruth. I'm here with my colleague, Laura Bussey, in the house. I'm thinking of all you mamas out there who are sending your children to college for the first time, to sending your children to kindergarten for the first time. For those of you who are students who are going back to school, and just all the transitions out there right now. Everyone is in flux as we transition to this new season, and sending all of you prayers and blessings, thinking about you. Laura, what is our question for today?
Christine, this is a perfect question for the start of a new school year. I'm so thankful. If you have a question for us, please go to soulenchilada.com. You can submit your question there. This comes from a mother whose daughter is heading back to college or in college, and she might be a little worried. Let's see. She writes, "My daughter in college smokes a lot of pot. I know it's not addictive, but I've noticed that she's not as motivated as she used to be to go to class or do things that she normally likes to do. Should I be concerned? And if so, what should I do?"
That is the question of the day. Oh,
Or
I'm so
decade.
glad. The question of the decade, right? I can't even, I literally, Laura, even just had someone come in this morning and ask me that exact question, come to therapy for this. What do I do with my weed smoking college student, high school student, 20 something student? And, I'm just thinking about this more broadly because to me, it relates to our entire addictive culture. We have a culture of addiction, right? And so, weed is now legal in most states, or at least many states. It's legal here in New Jersey, where I am, certainly legal in Colorado.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's amazing in some ways, right? It's this natural occurring plant, and we were taught growing up that it's not addictive, like this mother is naming. I was taught that it was not addictive. And yet now more and more research is coming out, and we're realizing, now that we have all these legalized states and we're studying it and tracking it, it is addictive. It is addictive.
Oh,
Um,
Christine, you just said what so many people don't want to hear. What a downer.
mm,
I know. I
mm,
know. I sat in a guidance counseling office years ago when we legalized
yeah,
marijuana, and my son was in high school, and I saw
yeah,
all of these athletes falling into the chasm of cannabis, right?
yeah.
And I met with a guidance counselor and a panel of teachers and principals, and we talked about what was happening. We could see the difference in our children. And I had one math
Mhm,
teacher I'll never forget. She stood up and she said, "What happened to maybe having a party or having fun on the weekends?
mhm,
Why do kids think that they can smoke pot or pop an edible any day of the week, even in my math class?" And she
mhm,
said that she had a group of seniors who would come in right after lunch. This is a high
mhm,
academic high
mhm,
academic high school.
mhm,
And she said, "I never knew who was high and who wasn't." And she said,
mhm,
"Because I didn't smell it anymore. Wax you don't
mhm,
smell, edibles you don't smell." And she said it completely changed the culture of my math class.
mhm,
And so
mhm.
this is super, super close to my heart. And I just have to say, right away, um, this is hard for me. This is really hard for me to talk because I have had arguments with family and counselors and psychiatrists telling me that
Mhm,
marijuana was not a gateway drug. And
mhm,
now I'm really sad because I think it certainly was for my son. And I, yeah. Anyways, let's keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. We're holding Evan as we
Mm,
do this. We're dedicating this to Evan.
mm,
And, part of me, I don't want to show up on this like the traditional conservatives in my life. And there's nothing wrong with conservatives, by the way. But I have a lot of people who are just afraid of, all sorts of drugs, afraid of alcohol, afraid of drugs,
mhm,
and often malign people who smoke weed or malign people who drink too much as being addicts and being quote unquote sinful. Um, and I guess maybe there's this honest part of me that realizes that we're all addicts. So if you think about an addiction as any behavior or strategy that you use to numb pain or discomfort, right? Any behavior or strategy you use to numb pain, conflict, discomfort. I hope that we can broaden this discussion to everyone, which I would say maybe includes 100% of us,
mhm,
including myself, who use, for me, my addiction. I'm just going to be real about it. My addiction, or my gateway drug is sugar,
mm.
right? Like I love sugar. I didn't realize how intoxicating sugar was, or caffeine for that matter, until I've tried to go off of it. And I become like a Medusa. Like I become like demonically oppressed when you take away my sugar for at least 3 to 4 days. And I had no idea that sugar had such power over me
Right.
until I tried to go off of it. And I'm still working with that addiction. But I love, after I've had a rough day of counseling, I say to myself, "Oh, Christine, you do such hard work. You sat and listened to couples fighting all day, so you deserve a whole bunch of sugar and a cocktail and some chocolate and some whatever, whatever. I mean, right now I was eating peanut brittle last night, right? You deserve that." And that is my addiction. I mean, I'm kind of being playful here, but it's for real. It's the way that I try to numb the discomfort or pain of my day. And it's as insidious as weed can be or as alcohol can be. And even though it might not be, have the same withdrawal symptoms that alcohol or cocaine has, it definitely has withdrawal symptoms, and I become awful when I go off of it. So, it's an addiction. Um, and, it reminds me of, just we've been talking a lot in the media about dopamine and how dopamine is, this wonderful natural drug that our body creates to motivate us to do things, right? And it's what gives us the feeling of pleasure. And it reminds me of how we are a society that's in constant pursuit of pleasure. And sadly, um, when that pleasure is taken away from us, whether it's sugar, whether it's shopping, whether it's, the excitement of being busy, for all you busy people out there, the adrenaline rush of being busy, there is a dopamine dip afterwards, right? And we crash and burn. And when we stop doing that pleasurable activity, whether it's shopping, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sugar, whether it's cocktails, whether it's being busy, our body tries to recalibrate or maintain homeostasis, just like a seesaw. And we have a dopamine dip, which causes feelings of anxiety and depression and sadness and emptiness, which often leads us to hit it again.
Right. I'm so thankful, Christine, that you were real, raw, and relevant, and talked about, feeling the impact of sugar on your life. And I'm so thankful that you just named that, like, we all have something that we could easily become addicted to, or we are addicted to. And I think that that's just the real place that we live, right? We don't want to be higher than, or, high and mighty and give advice like we've got it all together. We're in the trenches trying to figure it out. And I'm so thankful you brought up the dopamine concept, because I'll be honest with you, I walked through the trenches of the mental health world with my son Evan, before losing him to depression and suicide in 2021. Nobody talked to me about this stuff. Just recently, I was listening to Hidden Brain, which is an amazing podcast on the difference between, it's called The Paradox of Pleasure. And I'll put that podcast in our show notes. And it opened the door. And I think it's been something, it's like breadcrumbs have been given to me over the past year of really asking, what is the impact of addiction and mental health? And I think there's such a overlap, or there's such an almost like two hands cupping together, praying together, clinging together. Like there's such an intertwine between the mental health world and addiction. When you look at people who have the makeup for depression, oftentimes there's an addiction component to it. So I've been diving into that over the past year, I would say. And that podcast, Hidden Brain, led me to the book of Dopamine Nation, which is just crazy that this woman's writing this question in, and it's a question that's been on my heart for a long time. And the subtitle is Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. The author's name is Anna Lembke. And I just think that honing in on that, the age of indulgence, there has got to be a correlation, Christine, between the age of indulgence and our mental health crisis that we're experiencing with our youth. Tell me I'm not crazy. I mean, there has to be.
Yeah.
Think about
absolutely
what they can indulge on, what we can indulge on. Just our phone alone. We can shop. We can see pornography. We can get addicted to scrolling. We know that scrolling increases dopamine in our brain.
Yeah.
We're living in such an incredibly different time and space than our ancestors.
Yeah. I'm so glad you bring up Anna's book, because, I've heard her speak. I've read some of the research that's coming out of Stanford, and this whole notion of, Anna Lembke talks about this whole notion of teeter-totters, and that if we give ourselves pleasure, we will always have a dip and there will always be a crash. There's always, in a sense, a price you pay for pleasure. And it's, in a sense, the way God wired us, right? So God wired us so that we have dopamine. I mean, here's the positive use of dopamine. Dopamine is supposed to be a motivational chemical. So we don't naturally like to do hard things. We don't naturally like to do uncomfortable things. And the only way we're going to do uncomfortable or hard things is through the promise of dopamine. So at one point in our lives, in our evolutionary heritage, we had to journey to find food, for instance, or find water. And we would do the hard thing of the journeying. I think of Africa, where I was in Ivory Coast, where we had to walk 2 miles to get to water. And we got a dopamine rush when we got water, but we had to do this hard thing and then we got water. Or we used to have to chop the wood so that we could get fire, which would give us warmth, which creates dopamine. We used to have to do these hard things to get the payoff. And now we can go to Costco, we can go to, Sam's Club, and we can just buy, and she uses this example. We can buy piles of beautiful fruit and amazing, any sort of chocolates. My favorite thing, coconut clusters from Costco. I can buy 20-pound bags of them and I don't have to work for it at all. And each coconut cluster gives me a dopamine rush. And I can just sit in front of the television effortlessly and just pop them in my mouth mindlessly.
Okay, this is not a chocolate commercial, just so everyone knows.
Sorry. I'm sorry. It's like food sex. I know.
Everybody going to Costco this week is going to be like, where are those clusters? I need those clusters. Christine loves those clusters.
Coconut chocolate cluster.
Oh my gosh. We have to laugh at this stuff. I mean, we have to laugh. Otherwise, we're just going to go crazy. We're going to go crazy.
Yeah, totally. And so the question is, how do we find motivation in this world when our survival isn't threatened anymore? Meaning, I don't know this woman's son. Is it son or daughter in the question? I can't remember.
It's her daughter.
It's her daughter. I don't know this woman's daughter exactly how old she is.
College.
But, she's a college student,
age,
right?
Yeah.
So say she's like 20. I have lots and lots of 20-somethings and teens who are vaping, weed. And the problem is weed takes away your motivation. So weed in the short term makes you feel really calm and chill and zen. And a lot of my clients use weed to put themselves to sleep. And I get it. The problem is they are not, it is psychologically addictive in terms and physiologically addictive for your dopamine receptors, right? So your dopamine receptors want to have homeostasis. So weed releases dopamine and then you have a crash and then you have this feeling of anxiety or restlessness. And you go, how do I get rid of this feeling of anxiety or restlessness? Oh, I'm going to use more weed. And so you get caught in this total bondage of this circle of, I smoke the weed, I feel calm, I feel chill. Now I feel restless and anxious again, which is your dopamine, the teeter-totter. It's your body trying to recalibrate. And then you want to smoke more weed. And that is how it creates an addictive cycle, right? Because that feeling of agitation and restlessness or discomfort is always going to come at the tail end of any dopamine activity, whether it's looking at porn, whether it's eating sugar, and, I don't have to list whether it's eating your coconut cluster.
Right. And I had this conversation with Evan because he got caught in that cycle when he was in high school. And he finally came to the realization that it wasn't worth it because the anxiety was ramping up. So even though there was some relief in the short term, the long-term problem was the anxiety was actually increasing.
That's right.
And that's one of the things that Anna, I'm going through her book right now. It's pretty amazing, but she breaks down the word dopamine. She spells it out in an acronym, and P is for problems. And that anytime something has too much control over us, and this would be a conversation that this mom could have with her daughter, or any one of us could have with anyone else. Or we could be honest about our own problems and say, what are the downsides of this involved in my life? Does it have too much control of me? Is it impacting my relationships? Is it impacting my finances? Is it negatively impacting my financial situation, my health, anything like that? And one of the things that Anna mentions just really briefly, but really hit me hard, was, is it impacting my moral relationships? Like, am I having a question about my identity? Is it morally impacting? And I thought, Christine, this fits perfectly with our last podcast. So,
Mm,
episode 42, we talked about our why and
mm,
knowing our why. And I'm just going to make a quick connection here because I think this could be something for our young adults or for any one of us. If we put our why next to this substance or this addictive behavior in our life, I don't think they're going to coincide. We're not going to be able to achieve our why, our bigger purpose in life, if something
mhm,
has too much control over us.
mhm,
And God didn't
mhm.
create us to be a slave to
Yeah,
anyone or anything. And
yeah.
so I would say, I wish I could sit with this young woman and say, okay, tell me about, how often are you smoking? How is it impacting your body? What are the problems you're experiencing? What are you trying to run from? And have those honest conversations and say, what do you feel called to do in this world? Or how could you add value to your college or to your college friends? And maybe
Mhm,
dots could connect in her mind to see, wow, I do have this purpose. I do have these great plans, and this smoking pot is holding me back. It's
mhm.
it's it's trapping me in that addiction. And maybe she wouldn't even be willing to admit it's an addiction, but maybe it's holding her back from living her best life.
Yeah, I love the example Anna also gives of like a lot of people that are addicted to sugar or weed or benign substances that we think of as being benign, like maybe reading romance novels in her case, or uh, having a glass of wine. She asks the question to people who say, "Oh, it's not an addiction. I'm just fine." She says, "Well, do you see yourself using this substance in 10 years? And do you see yourself using it in 5 years? And then do you see yourself using it next year?" And I like that because, I mean, that's one way of getting at it. Like, is this something that you're feeling like you need? And is it something that you see yourself using in 20 years to kind of get by? And then the question is, can you go off of it? And a lot of people like myself, I'm just going to be honest, say, "Oh, I'm not addicted to sugar." Or I said during COVID, "I'm not addicted to having cocktails or happy hour every night after my long day of clients." But you give it up, you try to give it up. And then I was like, whoa, I'm having headaches. I'm feeling jittery. I can't calm down. I can't focus. And a lot of people feel like they have ADD. ADD, attention deficit disorder, is, obviously going crazy during COVID. Everyone had ADD because when you stop a high dopamine activity, like having cocktails, scrolling on your phone, watching hypervigilantly for news, you go into a state of depression, anxiety, restlessness, and a lack of focus. Um, and so, what's happening to a lot of, for instance, our students is they're addicted to their phones. They're the first generation that have had phones forever, right? Have grown up with phones. And you try to get rid of a phone for 1 month, and you suddenly feel anxious all the time, restless, disconnected, and you're having a dopamine crash, right? And so that is one of if I was thinking of advice for this woman, and you gave some good advice, Laura, I thank you for talking a little bit about noticing the problem the addiction's causing. But another challenge is to go through dopamine detox. Dopamine detox, I invite clients to do it all the time. If they're struggling with restlessness or anxiety or depression, I say, okay, give up shopping, give up Amazon shopping for 1 month, give up your phone for 1 month. Go get a flip phone. You can get them at Walmart. They're very cheap. Give up your smartphone for 1 month and see if you're not addicted to that thing.
Do they ever come
And
back and visit you again?
oh my gosh, so many of them go, "Whoa."
Whoa.
Whoa. Usually our willpower can get us through about 3 days. And then on the fourth day around there, people go, whoa, I am so addicted to my phone, or I am so addicted to Amazon shopping. It's tough and we don't even realize it. It's so insidious. So go, I would say for this mom, see if her daughter could go on a dopamine detox. Think of it that way. And I mean, this is the other thing is how do we help our kids' survival instincts kick in? So if kids have all their needs met, if they have money, if they have room, if they have board and they have tuition and it's being paid by mom and dad, why wouldn't you spend your money on pot? I mean, come on, it feels good. It feels good. Everybody's doing it for real. And I always ask the question, where are these kids getting the money for their alcohol and their drugs? And usually it's because mom and dad are paying for everything. And if mom and dad are paying for everything, they are not in a dopamine deficit, which means I have to work hard to pay for my insurance or my cell phone bill or my tuition. So I would say to this mother, let your daughter know that she is a responsible adult and that you are so glad that she's a responsible adult and that you believe in her and you trust in her. And that is why, since she's turning 20 or 21, you are empowering her to pay for her own cell phone bill, her own insurance, and for her room and board. Maybe you'll still pay for her tuition. But suddenly, that student is going to have a much more difficult time affording her alcohol and her pot, which is very expensive, whether you buy it on the down low or whether you get it at a nice, legitimate shop. Because that's how we kick in our kids' survival instincts. If they have too much money, they can buy whatever they want and they're going to go for the pleasure because they're healthy. Everyone wants pleasure. Right?
Oh my gosh. I feel like we're just now scraping the surface of this. This is
yes, shoot, we're out of time.
I know this happens. Are you willing to make this a part 1 and we could next week dive into part 2 and talk more about dopamine and other ways in which we can support young people and ourselves? I feel like we've got 2 things here. We've got our own issues and we've also got those who we love and wanting to support and empower and equip those younger people. What do you think, Christine?
Yeah, absolutely. I am so willing.
Oh,
So
good.
willing, Laura. Let's do it. Let's do a part 2 on this one for sure and talk about more solutions for this mom and more solutions for our own addictions as well.
I think so. Perfect. Thank you, Christine, for being here and for everyone who is listening to this podcast. We appreciate you. Tune in next time for part 2 of Dopamine World of Indulgence Where We Live. And that, my friend, is episode 43 of the Soul Enchilada.